January in Spokane, Washington is no picnic. All right, the third and final installment of the Wiz. Yeah. And the bureaucrat says, "And I'm afraid that's all you're going to find out there, but I expect you already know that, since our records show that you and your wife were once granted a landscape visitation permit. She won't be accompanying you this time." "No, she passed away a few years ago," Evans said evenly, holding the bureaucrat's gaze. The government employee seemed to reflect on this fact for a moment. He removed a handkerchief from his trouser pocket and mopped his brow, then returned the dingy piece of cloth to his pocket. He then said, "What you propose, Mr. Evans, is not without certain risks. I need to be convinced that you will be well supplied with food and water, that you have footwear suitable for the terrain you will encounter, as well as the maps and other equipment you will need to find your way about. Here are the documents and photographs proving I have everything I need," Evans said, and handed him a file folder. "Preparation is the key. We have to make sure that you are capable of an undertaking as a lengthy hike through the landscape. We can't have people darting out past the protected limits of the city whenever they feel like it," he said, now glancing through the contents of the file folder. He smiled when he saw the 3 crisp $100 bills, as well as a personal check covering the cost of the permit. Well, I see everything is in order here, Mr. Evans. Give me a moment while I get your permit printed up for you." Several weeks passed as Evans waited for the winds to fall below the 20-mile-per-hour prescribed limit for visits beyond the city to the outer reaches of the landscape. The storm season had lasted almost 8 months altogether, a full 2 weeks longer than the previous year. A record had been set in Singapore for the world's most powerful storm, with winds exceeding the speed of sound. 761 miles per hour on a typical summer day at sea level. Note, the speed of sound v is given by v equals the square root of gamma times r times t, where gamma equals a ratio of specific air temperatures, r equals the gas constant for air, and t equals the absolute air temperature, this courtesy of NASA. Wearing a white shirt, khaki shorts, hiking boots, and a full-brimmed hat, Evans lugged a backpack stuffed with his gear and supplies to the nearest subway entrance from his residential tower. People dressed in such fashion were an uncommon sight, particularly someone encumbered with a backpack, so Evans received several odd looks from his fellow passengers. At the city's outer edge, the train made its final stop, and Evans walked through a pedestrian tunnel toward the gate through which he would pass under the watchful eye of a uniformed official. When he took an elevator to the surface almost directly beneath the gate itself, he was the only passenger. And when he stepped out of the elevator, the smell of the surface air entered his nostrils and stirred him with its scent, wafting from the landscape just beyond the massive wall. He approached an unsmiling guard and handed the man his permit. The guard examined the permit with a dubious air and then said, Your purpose to visit the landscape is recreation. Yes, sir. Only a rare few ever want to go out there for recreation. It's been a hobby of mine since I was a boy. Your permit allows you 3 days out there. See that you're back in time. Otherwise, you'll have to pay a stiff fine and be subject to questioning. Oh, I understand, Evans replied, in a more even tone this time. The guard stepped back into his hut and pressed a button on a small console, disactivating the door, which slid to the side. Evans made a sudden dip with his legs and jounced his backpack into a more snug position and passed through the gate. For a few hours he hiked without haste, letting his gaze drift over the landscape, the rock-strewn, barren immensity of its open space. Untroubled, vaguely content, his mind having emptied itself of his usual day-to-day concerns, Evans pressed on toward the distant ridge from where he hoped to gain an expansive and sweeping view of the terrain. But soon he took note of the dark gray clouds which had been amassing far overhead. He had hoped to avoid a flash rainstorm, though now it seemed he might receive a drenching after all. The ground began to rise at a steeper incline, and he shortly came upon an opening to a cave. What extraordinary good luck, he thought, stepping just inside the mouth of the cave as the first heavy raindrops began to pelt to the ground. He gazed into the distance in the direction from which he'd come, the ramparts of the city no longer visible, now lost in the brownish-red haze. Evans felt a strange sense of dislocation, of having altogether removed himself from the human world. As the rain increased its tempo, Evans resigned himself for a wait, which could last as long as several hours. He considered venturing further into the cave among the gear he brought along, a flashlight. But something exceptionally uninviting about the cave, a smell he'd never before encountered either in the courtyard or the park, or even on one of the many construction sites he'd worked at over the years. This smell alone produced within him a certain reluctance to do so. Before long, he heard massive claps of thunder and felt their deep rumbling vibrations in his chest and beneath his feet. Bolts of lightning lit up the cloud-darkened sky, some darting jaggedly down to the ground in the distance. In another moment, he couldn't believe his eyes as a pair of animals ran up the slope directly below him, then flew right past him and disappeared into the interior of the cave. He staggered backward, his backpack now